Shalom Israel, it's Kazawan, and the name of this video is, Did David think he would be king in heaven? I'm doing this video because there's a doctrine out there that says, when the kingdom of heaven is established, David will be the king of Israel instead of Yahushua. Now, this doctrine is the result of a misunderstanding of a few Old Testament verses. Now, of course, a lot of Old Testament only brothers are pushing this doctrine, but it's completely wrong. As great as King David was, he will not sit upon the throne as the king of Israel in heaven. The funny thing about this doctrine is that David himself knew that he would not be the active king of Israel in heaven. However, let's look at the scriptures people are using to see why they came to this wrong conclusion. This is Ezekiel 34:23. It says, "And I will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them, even my servant David. He shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd." 24. "And I, Yahweh, will be their God, and my servant David a prince among them. I, Yahweh, have spoken it." So here we see the Most High saying that in the future, he would set up one shepherd over the whole nation of Israel, and he refers to that shepherd as David. All right, let's go to Ezekiel 37:23. It says, "Neither shall they defile themselves any more with their idols, nor with their detestable things, nor with any of their transgressions. But I will save them out of all their dwelling places wherein they have sinned, and will cleanse them. So shall they be my people, and I will be their God." Here's the point. 24. "And David my servant shall be king over them, and they all shall have one shepherd. They shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them." So we see this verse says, David his servant shall be king over all Israel. Let's look at another one. This is Hosea 3:5. It says, "Afterward shall the children of Israel return and seek Yahweh their God and David their king, and shall fear Yahweh and his goodness in the latter days." Again, this verse says the time would come in the future when Israel would seek after the Most High and David their king. Now, let's look at one last example. This is Jeremiah 30:8. It says, "For it shall come to pass in that day, saith Yahweh of hosts, that I will break his yoke from off thy neck, and will burst thy bonds, and strangers shall no more serve themselves of him." Verse 9. "But they shall serve Yahweh their God, and David their king, whom I will raise up unto them." So this is the fourth verse that mentions David being the ruler over the nation of Israel in the kingdom of heaven. So you can see why some people might believe that David will be resurrected to be king over the nation of Israel. Jeremiah 30:9, it says, David their king, and it also says, whom I will raise up unto them. Now, this seems to be pretty clear. However, the last part of the verse is severely misunderstood. The statement, whom I will raise up unto them, is not a reference to the resurrection of David. It's a reference to someone being raised up from the seed line of David. See, this is known as the Davidic kingly line, which are the descendants of David that sat upon the throne, starting with King Solomon. Again, it says, David their king, whom I will raise up unto them. In other words, the Most High would raise up someone from the seed line of David and establish that man as the king of Israel. Let's go into the precepts to prove what it means when it says, David their king, whom I will raise up unto them, because it's not talking about David being resurrected. Let's go to Genesis 38 and verse 8. It says, And Judah said unto Onan, Go in unto thy brother's wife and marry her. Watch this. And raise up seed to thy brother. Now, what was Judah telling Onan to do? He was telling Onan to have sex with the woman to raise up or produce offspring to his brother. This has nothing to do with resurrection. This is talking about the continuation of a line by raising up descendants of that line. Watch, let's look at another example. This is Deuteronomy 25 and 7. It says, And if the man like not to take his brother's wife, then let his brother's wife go up to the gate unto the elders and say, My husband's brother refuseth to raise up unto his brother a name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of my husband's brother. See, the man in this verse refused to do his brotherly duty according to the law by giving this woman a child. Again, we see how a man is raised up through the continuation of his seed. This is exactly how David was raised up, and this is how David will be king. He will not sit upon the throne himself, but his offspring will. See, the thing is, David knew that he would not be the king of Israel in heaven, because the Most High used Nathan the prophet to explain to David that he was the start of a dynasty of kings. Watch this. 1 Chronicles 17 and 11. It says, And it shall come to pass, when thy days be expired, when David dies, it says, that thou must go to be with thy fathers. Watch this. That I will raise up thy seed after thee, which shall be of thy sons. Watch this. And I will establish his kingdom. So David understood that he was the king at that time, but the Most High was going to raise up his son after him to sit on the throne as king. See, that was a promise given to David from the Most High. Now let's read this same prophecy in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 12. It says, And when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, after David dies, it says, I will set up thy seed after thee, which shall proceed out of thy bowels. In other words, David would have a son. It says, And I will establish his kingdom. Again, the Most High promised David that his son would sit on the throne of Israel as king. See, the Most High never promised David that he would raise him from the dead and make him king over Israel. He promised David that he would raise up a son from his loins and make him king over Israel. You see, David never thought he would be the king over Israel in heaven. He understood perfectly that the promise was that someone from his lineage would always be on the throne. Watch this. Verse 13, it says, He, the offspring of David, shall build an house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Now, let's jump down to verse 16. The Most High is still talking to David. It says, And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. See, David's throne is established forever. But how? Through the lineage of his sons sitting on the throne. Again, this is the Davidic dynasty, a line of kings from the loins of King David that continually sat upon the throne. This is why those verses said that David, their king, will be raised up unto them. It's not a literal reference to David himself. It's a reference to someone from David's lineage who the Most High would raise up to sit on the throne. When the Most High explained to David that his line would lead to the heavenly king of Israel, David understood it clearly. Watch. Let's go down to verse 25. This is David talking. It says, "And now, O Yahweh, the word that thou hast spoken concerning thy servant and concerning his house, establish it forever, and do as thou hast said. And let thy name be magnified forever, saying, Yahweh of hosts is the God over Israel." Watch this. "And let the house of thy servant David be established before thee." See that? He said, let the house of thy servant David be established before thee. In other words, let my descendants, the Davidic dynasty, be established forever before thee. David never expected to be the king of Israel in heaven, but he did expect the king to be someone from his lineage. Now we know that Solomon was the first son David had that sat upon the throne of Israel. Let's go to 1 Kings 2:1. It says, "Now the days of David drew nigh that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth," meaning I'm about to die. "Be thou strong therefore, and show thyself a man. And keep the charge of Yahweh thy God, to walk in his ways, to keep his statutes and his commandments and his judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that thou mayest prosper in all that thou doest, and whithersoever thou turnest thyself." Verse 4. "That Yahweh may continue his word which he spake concerning me, saying, If thy children take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul," watch this, "there shall not fail thee," said he, "a man on the throne of Israel." So we see David reminding Solomon that the Most High promised him that as long as his children stayed faithful to the Most High, they would always sit upon the throne of Israel as kings. That's what David understood. Now, this is very important. The promise of sitting upon the throne was conditional to the behavior of the children, but the position as the ordained kings by the Most High was irreversible. In other words, it was possible for David's sons to lose the ability to physically sit on the throne because of their sins. However, nothing could change the fact that they would still be the chosen line of kings by the Most High. That's important to understand. Now, we know that Solomon was the first son of David to sit on the throne. Let's see what Solomon said after he became king. This is 2 Chronicles 6:8. It says, "But Yahweh said to David my father, For as much as it was in thine heart to build a house for my name, thou didst well in that it was in thine heart. Notwithstanding, thou shalt not build the house. But thy son, which shall come forth out of thy loins, he shall build the house for my name." Verse 10. "Yahweh therefore hath performed his word that he hath spoken." What word? Watch this. This is Solomon talking. "For I am risen up in the room of David my father, and am set on the throne of Israel, as Yahweh promised, and have built the house for the name of Yahweh, God of Israel." Now notice that Solomon said he was raised up in the room of David his father. This is what the scriptures mean when they say that David their king shall be raised up unto them. It's not talking about the resurrection of David as the king. It's talking about the kingly line that comes from David. This line leads to the final king of Israel in heaven. How do we know that? Look at this. This is Jeremiah 23:5. It says, "Behold, the days come, saith Yahweh." Watch this. "That I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth." Now, it doesn't get any clearer than this. Jeremiah 30:9 says, "David their king, whom I will raise up unto them." And people are saying that means David will be king in heaven. But here we see Jeremiah prophesying that a righteous branch would be raised up unto David. In other words, Jeremiah was saying at that time that someone would come through David's lineage in the future, and he would be the king of Israel. This particular king would execute judgment and justice on earth. Now, everyone should be able to clearly see that this is not talking about King David. It can't be, because the prophecy states that someone would come up out of his line. Now, when David died, Solomon took over, and the Most High established his throne. But Solomon died too. So when Solomon died, he had a son, Rehoboam, who took over. Let's read that. 1 Kings 11, verse 43. It says, "And Solomon slept with his fathers, and was buried in the city of David his father. And Rehoboam his son reigned in his stead. After Rehoboam died, his son Abijah took over as king." Now, the same pattern repeated itself. A king would come up, that king would die, and his son would come on the throne. So there had to be a future king coming to fulfill the prophecy. Now, let's go to Psalms 89:35. It says, "Once have I sworn by my holiness that I will not lie unto David." Verse 36, "His seed shall endure forever." Watch this. "And his throne as the sun before me." So we see that David's throne would always exist. How? Through his sons. It said, "His seed shall endure forever," meaning there would always be a rightful king. See, this is a concept that we have to understand. David was raised up through his children, not himself. Now, of course, David will be in the kingdom of heaven, and he will still be recognized as a king. It's the same way today that presidents are elected, and after their term is over, they are still called president. But they are no longer the active president. It's the same thing. Now, the Most High swore to David that one of his descendants would be the king of Israel. Let's get one more verse. This is Psalms 132:11. It says, "Yahweh hath sworn in truth unto David, he will not turn from it. Of the fruit of thy body will I set upon thy throne." Again, the promise was that someone from David's loins, meaning someone from his lineage, would sit upon the throne. David understood what the Most High was saying. Now, I could go a lot deeper on this topic, but I just wanted to show that David will not be the king of Israel in heaven. I also wanted to show that a lot of verses that people are using that they think are talking about David are in fact not talking about David. I get these same verses thrown at me all the time, especially from the Old Testament only brothers. What about Ezekiel 37:24, Hosea 3:5, Jeremiah 30:9? It says David their king. Yes, it says David their king, but it's not literally talking about David the man. It's talking about someone who is raised up out of the line of David. Now let me say this in conclusion. I waited the whole video, but I'm not going to end it without saying very plainly that the man who fulfills all this is Yahawashi. However, that's not the focus point of this video. Hear me clearly. The focus of this video was to prove that those verses are not talking about David ruling as king in heaven. I did it this way on purpose because what people will do is ignore the whole video and say, prove it's talking about Yahweh Shai, instead of dealing with the fact that it's not talking about David. You see, that's what people like to do. They ignore all the holes in their doctrine and then attack yours instead. So let me say this. If you don't believe that it's talking about Yahweh Shai, that's fine. Do your own video proving that it's not. But on this video, you got to deal with the fact that these verses that we looked at are not talking about King David ruling in heaven. Deal with that, because that's the point of this video. So I'm going to end it here. It's not a long video, but as always, I hope somebody got some understanding. And with that, I say, Shalom.